The idea is for our introduction of the progress tests is to replace some of the testing we already do in English, Maths and Science using either old Key Stage 3 SATs papers or previous GCSE papers, is to develop testing that we can measure and have benchmarked nationally to give us some confidence in the levels and the accuracy of the levels. To make sure that we've got assessment that we can compare outside of our schools, so we know that the levels of and the results have got some rigour to them, and that we can make sure that the progress is being measured consistently across consistent measures in other year groups.
One of the things we do intend to do is pilot it so that we can see how our students respond, because it's going to be important to us to support them properly so that we can be sure the test is administered in the same way for every child. So we will be piloting it to see how that'll work.
The plans for the progress tests are within us having an account with the complete digital solution. So actually everything we do with GL assessments is digitally. We plan to use the progress tests within Key Stage 3. That then allows us to look at what we're doing with life after levels.
We're just at the very start of that journey now to try and start introducing them to small cohorts of students to see how the tests work with our students, to make sure we've got all the logistics in place correctly, to make sure we're getting reliable information from the tests. But then to use that in the same way that we've done with other exams and tests previously, to use them diagnostically to identify strengths and weaknesses, and then obviously inform our teaching and learning using those things.
We've been using the progress test in maths for the last 2 years. In our first year of using the progress test in maths, we used them at the start of the year and then at the end of the year, so that they could not only give us an instant snapshot of attainment, they could also show us progress during that year. Thereafter, we use the progress test in maths at the end of each academic year, from year 3 right up to year 9.
What we have to try to avoid doing is bombarding staff with the assessments outside of the classroom. So it's really getting the balance of we're doing these assessments so that we can help you in your lessons and help us get to know the students, but actually we don't want to take lesson time off them as well for doing that.
The progress test in maths was something that we had a look at together in order to see whether it was something we can use to see that children are making progress through Key Stage 3. We have a set of data for which we're going to be accountable, and that's the transition data from primary schools. And clearly we don't want to in any way undermine our accountability for progress from that point, but it's not perfect in itself. So many students regress between that test in May and actually arriving here in September of Year 7. So the progress tests in maths and the transition test in maths will give us that chance to see what they can actually do when they come through the door. It helps us to make diagnoses of where students' strengths lie, where their weaknesses lie, so that we can inform teaching. But also it gives us that fuller picture of the progress they're going to make through Key Stage 3, benchmarked against national data. One of the things we've been a little bit anxious about is that when levels no longer exist, how can we be absolutely certain that the progress we're seeing in our students is what's expected nationally? Clearly we've got good descriptors of what's expected at the end of Year 9. Clearly we've got GCSEs that give us an indication of what students nationally achieve. But the picture's evolving. We're not sure yet where the standard's going to be. And these GL assessments will give us that chance to make a comparison with how students are doing nationally.
The idea of having the Year 6 SAT as a baseline is externally fixed. There's nothing we can do about that. But actually having a like-for-like comparison to that is incredibly difficult. So having a baseline assessment at the start of Year 7 and then a similar comparable assessment at the end of Year 8, end of Year 9, end of Year 7, end of Year 8, end of Year 9 is incredibly important to be able to identify the weaknesses and gaps early on, and then to measure the extent to which we've managed to address those, and to make sure that we can measure progress from reliable milestones across the journey.
We use the data out of the progress test in maths on a number of different levels, and I would see each of our teachers having a different level of access, if you like, to that data. On a superficial level, I would expect all teachers to understand the national curriculum level that comes out of the tests, and also the standardised age score, which then can be easily compared with the CAT 4.
GL have their student view, the little image that they have, and we've taken that a little bit further, and we have our student view in that we can look at the screeners because that helps us. We get Fisher Family Target Trust in, but we use the CAT test with that as well. We use Attitudes to Learning, but we use PASS with that as well. And actually all of that help us to actually form our whole student view.
One of the things we were particularly impressed with the progress tests in maths was that they cover so well the curriculum as we deliver it. And they seemed to be so comprehensive in covering a range of topics in a very fair way that would represent a whole range of mathematical skill. So we felt that that will differentiate very well between students because it tests a range of different mathematical applications, and it tests them in such a way that they can demonstrate different mathematical skills. We thought it will stretch the students well, and we think our pilots are going to prove that.
I've also offered my own webinars to my staff on every possible aspect of the data available. So that if they're stuck on the verbal deficit, or they're stuck on how to interpret the mean, or they're stuck on how the Steinines work and what the implication of that might be for setting or whatever else, then there's a webinar available for them. Another way to ensure teachers understand the data is not to focus on the numbers. Is to focus on the stories that lie beneath them.
They certainly will be part of setting the targets. In our approach, we look at Key Stage 4 and we work our way back. So any of the assessments that we do tie in along the way of how we can adapt what we're actually going to do.
Those teachers who want to dig deeper, in secondary, the maths teachers. In primary, perhaps the maths coordinator. I would expect them to dig deeper and look at the question level analyses. I'd expect them to look at process and understanding and to identify the gaps. For me, the data that comes out of the progress test for maths is about gap identification. Where are individual students lacking? Where is a cohort lacking? And then how are we going to do something about that?
Colleagues have been really supportive in helping us facilitate the assessments across the academy. In fact, some colleagues are getting very, very good at actually invigilating and understanding why we're doing them. And I think the reason because that is we share the information with staff. So actually we may be asking for time to do the assessments, but this is what we've got from it, and this is what then you can use within the classroom. We are looking at actually having assessment windows in our assessment calendar. We're fortunate in the academy that on a Thursday afternoon our students do enrichment from 2 p.m. So actually sometimes we don't want to take the enrichment off the students, but sometimes it's an area where we're not affecting lessons so that we can do it in those times.
I think it's important to make sure that all the testing we do is for a purpose. We don't test for the sake of testing. We don't just test to give each child a number. We test to identify areas for improvement and areas for intervention. And we make sure that we've got a suite of tests which tell us a range of different things about different students. We're increasingly trying to develop a range of data about each child that gives us as much information as possible to tell us what type of child they are, what their ability is and where their strengths and weaknesses lie. And then we can use those at class teacher level, at a pastoral level with form tutors and year leaders, and then at a more senior level to monitor cohorts to identify where the strengths and weaknesses of different groups and different individuals lie.
The strategic use of data, the assessments that we get is really important to us for a number of reasons. Those benchmarks at set points during the journey are really important for us to then compare from the starting point, again identifying progress, hopefully where the progress is very strong, but strategically really important when we look at the groups, individual student groups, subject groups, etc., gender, to identify where any potential intervention is needed very quickly so that we can address that, and then hopefully the next time the data is collected we're able to show that that issue has been addressed.
We share the data that we receive from GL in several different ways. So for example, with the reading ages, everyone knows about the reading ages. The staff know them so that they can personalise their lessons appropriately to the students. The students know them so that they know where they are and what they need to do. And the same for parents really, and how they can support.
We've supported children in two ways. One is very openly and honestly with them, in that we present them in meetings with the child, the parent and their form tutor with the findings of any report that's generated from the tests that have been taken. If a student is, and perhaps the place we do that most significantly is with our lowest ability and special needs students, where their reviews are very heavily informed by the data that's generated from these tests. But equally, we're now doing that with every student, where they all have a review meeting with the form tutor, the parent and the child, and we use the report to illustrate to the parent where the child's strengths and weaknesses lie, what the recommendations are for the child, and then discuss that with them as we put intervention plans into place and say, and therefore this shows that you will need to. And I think that means that the child can see there's some detailed analysis gone on of their performance, and it's not just a gut feeling from the teachers of where they might need to pull their socks up a bit. There's a really well thought through, well informed piece of feedback for them and for the parents, which is quite accessible to everybody.
Sometimes parents do find it quite difficult to understand the range of assessments that we do. So therefore, when we're at a tutor evening, we will spend time going through the reports with the parents so that they can specifically look at what they have for their child. They meet with the tutors, and they can also meet with any of the team, for example, senior leadership team, year 7 team, their year leaders, to make sure that they can actually have that conversation. Any meeting that is arranged with parents, the child's profile is printed off, so that, for example, we have their behaviour records, their attendance records, their academic records and their attitudes records, which includes reading ages, which include CAT tests, so that story is all in one place.
Ofsted doesn't add to my workload. It's just another way of using the data, and I see that I have an inspection every time I report through to governors, and we meet governors regularly, 4 times a year. We are looking at our progress data. If it falls into an Ofsted year, that's the 5th time that same data may well be scrutinised at that same level. So I don't look at it in terms of we do one thing for Ofsted and we do other things for everything else. Ofsted look at the integrated, embedded practices that we have within a school, and we're constantly looking at that. So Ofsted are more than happy to see what we do, but we don't do it for them. We do it for our young people.